Tenerife Airport Disaster. March 27, 1977, Los Rodeos Airport, Tenerife, Canary Islands. A quiet Sunday afternoon turned into the deadliest day in aviation history. In a thick blanket of fog, two Boeing 747s, one operated by KLM, the other by Pan Am, found themselves on a collision course on the same runway. Moments earlier, a terrorist bombing at nearby Gran Canaria had diverted dozens of flights to this small regional airport, clogging the taxiways with aircraft never meant to be there. With visibility reduced to near zero, radio frequencies crowded, and crews under pressure, a fatal miscommunication unfolded. Believing he had takeoff clearance, the KLM captain initiated his roll, unaware that the Pan Am jet was still taxiing down the same runway. Seconds later, the KLM aircraft slammed into the Pan Am at nearly full speed. A fireball erupted, metal twisted, bodies were thrown. In all, 583 people lost their lives. Investigators later pointed to a tragic chain: misunderstood cockpit instructions, language ambiguities, and inadequate air traffic control. The KLM captain, a respected training instructor, had misinterpreted a clearance to stand by as a command to go. The aftermath forced sweeping changes to aviation protocols worldwide, standardizing phraseology, reinforcing cockpit hierarchy, and improving runway safety systems. The Tenerife disaster remains the gravest lesson in how a single misheard word can cost hundreds of lives. Japan Airlines Flight 123. On August 12, 1985, Japan Airlines Flight 123 took off from Tokyo's Haneda Airport, bound for Osaka. Just 12 minutes into the flight, disaster struck. The Boeing 747 SR began to violently shake as it lost all hydraulic control. Behind the chaos was a hidden flaw, one that would lead to the deadliest single aircraft accident in aviation history. The plane crashed into Mount Takamagahara, northwest of Tokyo, killing 520 of the 524 people on board. The cause was chillingly preventable. 7 years earlier, in 1978, the aircraft had suffered a tail strike during a landing. Boeing was tasked with the repair, but instead of using the required continuous doubler plate, their mechanics used two separate splice plates. Over time, this shoddy fix weakened the rear pressure bulkhead. On that August evening in 1985, it finally gave way, triggering explosive decompression and rupturing all four hydraulic systems. The crew, left with no control over the plane, fought to keep it airborne for 32 harrowing minutes. Their efforts were heroic, but ultimately, the aircraft slammed into the mountain at 6:56 p.m. The investigation squarely blamed Boeing's faulty repair. In its aftermath, Japan Airlines issued public apologies, Boeing paid compensation, and sweeping changes were made to maintenance procedures and oversight. Charkhi Dadri mid-air collision, November 12, 1996. Skies above Charkhi Dadri, just west of New Delhi, India. Two commercial jets pierced the clouds, unaware they were on a collision course. Saudi Arabian Airlines Flight 763 had just taken off from Indira Gandhi International Airport, climbing to 14,000 feet. At the same moment, Kazakhstan Airlines Flight 1907 was descending toward the same airspace, scheduled to land. In a matter of seconds, routine turned to catastrophe. At 6:40 p.m., the two aircraft collided mid-air. The Kazakh Ilyushin Il-76's tail sliced through the wing of the ascending Saudi Boeing 747. Both jets disintegrated instantly, raining fire and metal onto the fields below. All 349 people aboard, passengers and crew, were killed, making it the world's deadliest mid-air collision. Investigations revealed a devastating truth. Miscommunication and poor English comprehension in the Kazakh cockpit led the descending plane to drop below its assigned altitude. Compounding this, India's radar system at the time lacked secondary surveillance, meaning controllers had no precise real-time data on aircraft altitudes. The tragedy forced urgent change. India overhauled its aviation infrastructure, installing modern radar, mandating cockpit crews to be proficient in English, and enforcing stricter airspace control protocols. The loss was enormous. but it spurred a transformation that made Indian skies safer for millions. Turkish Airlines Flight 981. On March 3, 1974, Turkish Airlines Flight 981 departed from Orly Airport in Paris, bound for London. What was supposed to be a routine journey turned catastrophic just minutes after takeoff. The McDonnell Douglas DC-10, packed with 346 passengers and crew, soared into the skies, but it would never reach its destination. Near the quiet expanse of the Ermenonville forest in northern France, the aircraft suddenly disintegrated mid-air and slammed into the ground. There were no survivors. The cause was brutally simple and utterly preventable. A design flaw in the rear cargo door allowed it to blow open at altitude, triggering explosive decompression. The floor above the cargo hold collapsed, severing key control cables. The pilots were left with no ability to steer or stabilize the aircraft. Just seconds after the failure, the jet plunged at terrifying speed into the forest below. This wasn't the first warning. 2 years earlier, a similar issue nearly ended in disaster, but the flaw remained unresolved. McDonnell Douglas had known about the defect. They issued advisories, but airlines weren't mandated to comply. Turkish Airlines Flight 981 became the price for that neglect. The aftermath was seismic. Investigators exposed the aircraft's design vulnerability and the lax enforcement of safety directives. Public outrage followed. Global aviation standards were overhauled. Mandatory modifications were ordered for all DC-10s. The tragedy of Flight 981 became a brutal turning point, a lesson written in wreckage and silence across a French forest. Saudi Flight 163. On August 19, 1980, Saudi Flight 163 lifted off from Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, bound for Jeddah, a Lockheed L-1011 TriStar with 301 souls aboard, passengers and crew. This flight would become a grim chapter in aviation history. What began as a routine domestic trip spiraled into a catastrophe unlike any other. Shortly after takeoff, just 7 minutes in, smoke alarms blared. A fire had broken out in the cargo hold. The crew declared an emergency and returned to Riyadh. The aircraft landed safely, but the danger wasn't over. Incredibly, instead of initiating an immediate evacuation, the plane continued taxiing, its engines still running. Precious minutes ticked by. The fire, hidden behind the bulkhead, silently consumed the cabin. By the time rescue crews reached the doors, some 23 minutes after landing, it was too late. All 301 aboard had perished, overcome by smoke and heat. The cockpit crew was later found still strapped in, unburned, but lifeless. Investigators traced the cause to a fire in a rear cargo compartment, likely ignited by a malfunctioning passenger item. But it was the procedural failures that drew outrage. Why hadn't the crew evacuated? Why was the plane not shut down immediately? The tragedy of Flight 163 wasn't that the aircraft crashed. It didn't. It was that everyone survived the landing and still died. This became the deadliest aviation disaster in which all occupants were alive when the aircraft reached the ground. Don't forget to like and subscribe. I've got more interesting videos coming up on the channel. Malaysia Airlines Flight MH17. On July 17, 2014, Malaysia Airlines Flight MH17 lifted off from Amsterdam, bound for Kuala Lumpur. But as the Boeing 777 soared over eastern Ukraine, a war zone simmering with tension between Ukrainian forces and pro-Russian separatists, it entered a corridor that would soon become a graveyard in the sky. At 4:20 p.m. local time, just hours into its journey, MH17 vanished from radar. Moments later, wreckage rained down across fields near Hrabov, Ukraine. All 298 people on board, men, women, children from 17 nations, were killed instantly. The cause? A Russian-made Buk surface-to-air missile launched from separatist-held territory. The plane was mistaken for a military aircraft. International investigators traced the weapon system to Russia's 53rd Anti-Aircraft Missile Brigade. Moscow denied involvement, but digital forensics, intercepted calls, and eyewitness testimony built a chilling picture. This was no tragic accident. It was an act of war, executed in peacetime airspace. Iran Air Flight 655. On the morning of July 3, 1988, Iran Air Flight 655 took off from Bandar Abbas, bound for Dubai, a routine commercial flight across the Persian Gulf. But just minutes after takeoff, at 10:17 a.m., the Airbus A300 vanished from radar. It had been struck by two surface-to-air missiles fired from the USS Vincennes, a U.S. Navy-guided missile cruiser operating in Iranian waters. The American crew, on high alert amid ongoing clashes with Iranian gunboats, mistook the ascending passenger plane for an attacking F-14 Tomcat. Despite the aircraft broadcasting a civilian transponder signal and following its scheduled flight path, the Vincennes launched a deadly strike. All 290 people on board, including 66 children, were killed instantly. Bodies and debris rained down into the Gulf. The incident triggered immediate global outrage. Iran called it a deliberate act of aggression. The United States called it a tragic mistake, yet never formally apologized. No one was held personally accountable. In 1996, a settlement was reached at the International Court of Justice. The U.S. paid $61.8 million in compensation to victims' families, but never admitted legal liability. American Airlines Flight 191. On May 25, 1979, American Airlines Flight 191 began what was supposed to be a routine journey from Chicago's O'Hare International Airport to Los Angeles. But just moments after takeoff, horror unfolded in the skies over Illinois. The aircraft, a McDonnell Douglas DC-10, suffered a catastrophic failure when its left engine tore away from the wing. In a terrifying chain reaction, vital hydraulic lines and systems were severed, and the aircraft lost its ability to control lift on one side. With 271 passengers and crew on board, and 2 people on the ground, Flight 191 had no chance. Witnesses described the plane rolling onto its side before plummeting into a field just beyond the runway, erupting into a towering fireball. All 273 lives were lost in seconds, making it the deadliest aviation accident on U.S. soil. Lockerbie bombing. On December 21, 1988, Pan Am Flight 103 exploded in the skies above Lockerbie, Scotland, just 38 minutes after taking off from London's Heathrow Airport en route to New York. The Boeing 747 shattered mid-air, sending flaming debris hurtling into the quiet town below. All 259 people aboard were killed instantly. 11 more lost their lives on the ground, bringing the death toll to 270, the deadliest terror attack on British soil. Investigators soon uncovered the cause: a bomb hidden inside a cassette player packed into a suitcase in the plane's cargo hold. The device, planted by operatives linked to Libya's intelligence agency, detonated over the small town as the aircraft cruised at 31,000 feet. Fragments of the fuselage landed in a crater-like scar in Lockerbie, while wreckage and bodies were scattered across a 50-square-mile radius. The global outrage was immediate. Years of investigation pointed to Libyan involvement, culminating in the indictment of Abdelbasset al-Megrahi and Lamin Khalifa Fhimah in 1991. Sanctions were imposed on Libya, and diplomatic tensions soared. After a decade of standoff, Megrahi was eventually convicted in 2001, though his release on compassionate grounds in 2009 stirred fresh controversy. Air India Flight 182. On the morning of June 23, 1985, Air India Flight 182 departed from Montreal, bound for Delhi via London. But at 31,000 feet above the Atlantic Ocean, just off the coast of Ireland, the Boeing 747 vanished from radar. Moments earlier, a bomb in the forward cargo hold exploded, ripping the aircraft apart mid-air and plunging all 329 souls on board to their deaths. Among the victims were 268 Canadian citizens, many of Indian descent, including dozens of children. Investigators quickly traced the source of the bombing to Sikh extremists based in Canada. Their motive? Retaliation for the 1984 Indian Army raid on the Golden Temple in Amritsar, Operation Blue Star. The group behind the attack, Babar Khalsa, had meticulously planned and planted the bomb inside checked luggage. A second device, destined for another Air India flight, exploded prematurely at Tokyo's Narita airport, killing 2 baggage handlers, confirming a broader international terror plot. The fallout was massive. It became the deadliest aviation attack before 9/11 and remains Canada's worst mass murder. Yet justice was elusive. Only one man, Inderjit Singh Rayat, was convicted, while others walked free after years of investigations marred by mishandled evidence and intelligence failures. Ukraine International Airlines Flight 752. On the morning of January 8, 2020, Ukraine International Airlines Flight 752 lifted off from Tehran's Imam Khomeini International Airport bound for Kyiv. Just minutes into the flight, as the aircraft climbed through Iranian airspace, a sudden burst of fire lit the sky. Moments later, the Boeing 737-800 came crashing down near Paran, killing all 176 people on board. Initially, Iranian officials blamed the crash on technical failure, but within days, mounting evidence from Western intelligence and recovered black box data told a darker story. The aircraft had been struck by 2 surface-to-air missiles, fired by Iran's own Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. The tragedy occurred just hours after Iran launched ballistic missiles at U.S. bases in Iraq, amid heightened tensions following the U.S. killing of General Qasem Soleimani. In a state of high alert, the military misidentified the passenger jet as a hostile threat. Among the dead were 82 Iranians, 57 Canadians, 11 Ukrainians, and several others from Sweden, Afghanistan, and the UK. The international outrage was swift. Vigils turned to protests across Iran, with thousands taking to the streets demanding accountability. 3 days after the crash, Iran admitted to the mistaken downing. China Airlines Flight 611. On May 25, 2002, China Airlines Flight 611 vanished from radar just 20 minutes after takeoff. The Boeing 747 was en route from Taipei to Hong Kong when it suddenly broke apart mid-air over the Taiwan Strait. All 225 passengers and crew on board were killed. For hours, the wreckage drifted across the sea, scattered, fragmented, and offering no immediate answers. The investigation unearthed a chilling truth buried in the past. In 1980, the same aircraft had suffered a tail strike during landing. Instead of replacing the damaged fuselage section, mechanics patched it using a shortcut, a repair that violated Boeing's specifications. Over the next 22 years, unseen cracks grew slowly beneath the surface. Then, at 35,000 feet, that hidden flaw finally gave way, tearing the aircraft apart in seconds. This wasn't just a case of mechanical failure. It was a decades-old decision, cutting corners, compromising safety, that turned fatal. Air France, Flight 447. On the night of May 31, 2009, Air France Flight 447 departed Rio de Janeiro en route to Paris, carrying 228 people across the vast Atlantic. By the early hours of June 1st, the Airbus A330 had vanished without a trace. What followed was one of the most haunting mysteries in modern aviation. Roughly 3 hours into the flight, as the aircraft entered a zone of turbulence, its pitot tubes, small sensors that measure airspeed, froze due to high-altitude ice crystals. The autopilot disengaged. In the cockpit, with conflicting speed readings and no clear sense of altitude, the pilots grew disoriented. They pulled the nose up, unknowingly stalling the aircraft. For over 3.5 agonizing minutes, the plane descended in complete darkness until it slammed into the Atlantic Ocean, killing everyone on board. Initial recovery efforts yielded little, only scattered debris. It took nearly 2 years to locate the black boxes, deep beneath the ocean's surface. Their data painted a grim picture. A perfect storm of equipment failure, human confusion, and over-reliance on automation. No one person was blamed, but the industry itself was forced to confront hard truths. The tragedy of Flight 447 reshaped aviation. It ignited global reforms in pilot training, emphasizing manual flying skills in high-stress scenarios. Korean Air Flight 007. On September 1, 1983, Korean Air Flight 007 vanished from the sky near Sakhalin Island, Russia. The Boeing 747 had departed New York, bound for Seoul with 269 souls on board. But somewhere over the Pacific, in the darkness of night, it drifted off course, unknowingly veering into restricted Soviet airspace at the height of Cold War paranoia. As the jet passed over Kamchatka and then Sakhalin, Soviet radar picked it up. Fearing a U.S. spy mission, they scrambled Su-15 interceptors. Despite signs the aircraft was civilian, its size, flight pattern, lack of evasive action, no contact was made. At 3:26 a.m. local time, under direct orders, the Soviet pilot fired 2 air-to-air missiles. Flight 007 was torn from the sky. All 269 aboard, including U.S. Congressman Larry McDonald, perished. The world reeled. The U.S. condemned the act as a massacre. The Soviet Union, at first, denied involvement, then later justified it as national defense. TWA Flight 800. On the evening of July 17, 1996, TWA Flight 800 lifted off from JFK International Airport, bound for Paris. Moments later, just 12 minutes into its journey, the Boeing 747 exploded mid-air off the coast of Long Island, New York. All 230 people on board were killed. It was one of the deadliest aviation disasters in U.S. history, and one shrouded in mystery from the start. Eyewitnesses reported seeing a streak of light and a fireball in the sky. Speculation exploded. Was it a bomb, a missile, a terrorist act? But after one of the most exhaustive investigations ever conducted by the NTSB, the cause pointed to something far more insidious: a fuel tank explosion. Investigators concluded that faulty wiring had likely ignited flammable vapors in the center wing fuel tank, triggering a catastrophic blast that tore the plane apart mid-flight. Swissair Flight 111. On the night of September 2, 1998, Swissair Flight 111 departed New York's JFK Airport en route to Geneva, Switzerland. Just over an hour into the flight, as the McDonnell Douglas MD-11 cruised off the coast of Nova Scotia, Canada, something began to go terribly wrong. Smoke seeped into the cockpit. The pilots, veterans with thousands of flight hours, followed emergency protocol, shutting down non-essential systems and requesting to divert to Halifax International Airport. But time was slipping away. Unknown to them, a hidden fire was rapidly spreading above the cockpit ceiling. At 10:31 p.m. Atlantic time, Swissair 111 vanished from radar. The aircraft had plunged into the Atlantic Ocean near Peggy's Cove, killing all 229 passengers and crew on board. Recovery teams faced a grim scene. The plane had shattered on impact, scattering debris across the ocean floor. Investigators from the Transportation Safety Board of Canada launched a painstaking 4-year investigation. Their findings revealed that faulty insulation on electrical wiring had ignited flammable materials in the overhead entertainment system, materials that were not adequately fire-resistant. The crew had little chance. Helios Airways Flight 522. On August 14, 2005, Helios Airways Flight 522 took off from Larnaca, Cyprus, bound for Prague with a scheduled stop in Athens. But what was meant to be a routine flight turned into one of the most haunting tragedies in aviation history. Just minutes after takeoff, the aircraft lost cabin pressure, oxygen masks deployed. But the crew never responded to repeated radio calls. Something was terribly wrong. The aircraft, a Boeing 737, continued climbing on autopilot, silent, unresponsive, and ghost-like, cruising over Greek airspace. Fighter jets scrambled. When they caught up with the plane near Grammatico, they saw a harrowing sight through the cockpit window. The captain slumped in his seat, motionless. In the cabin, passengers sat eerily still, their oxygen masks dangling. Everyone on board, 115 passengers and 6 crew, had succumbed to hypoxia, unconscious due to the lack of oxygen. For over 2 hours, Flight 522 flew as a ghost plane until it finally ran out of fuel and crashed into the hills near Grammatico, killing all 121 people on board. Investigations revealed that the pressurization system had been mistakenly left in manual mode after maintenance. The crew failed to recognize and correct the issue, and the lack of oxygen slowly overtook everyone. a lone flight attendant, Andreas Prodromou, regained brief consciousness and attempted to save the aircraft in its final moments. But it was too late. The crash of Helios 522 led to major changes in crew training and aircraft pressurization alert systems. But its most chilling legacy? A jetliner flying itself across the sky, filled with unconscious souls, until gravity brought it down. Ethiopian Airlines Flight 302. On the morning of March 10, 2019, Ethiopian Airlines Flight 302 took off from Addis Ababa, bound for Nairobi. Just 6 minutes after takeoff, the Boeing 737 MAX vanished from radar, crashing near Bishoftu, Ethiopia. All 157 people on board were killed. It was a horrifying echo of Lion Air Flight 610, which had crashed under eerily similar circumstances just 5 months earlier. As investigators combed through the wreckage, the culprit emerged: a faulty software system known as MCAS, the Maneuvering Characteristics Augmentation System. Designed to push the aircraft's nose down if it sensed a stall, MCAS activated repeatedly based on erroneous sensor data. The pilots fought back, but the system overpowered them. There had been no clear warning, no time to recover. This was not just a tragedy, it was a wake-up call. The global aviation community reacted swiftly. Within days, countries around the world grounded the entire Boeing 737 MAX fleet. Boeing, once seen as the gold standard of safety, was thrust into crisis. German Wings, Flight 9525. On March 24, 2015, German Wings Flight 9525 vanished from radar during what should have been a routine journey from Barcelona to Düsseldorf. Just 44 minutes into the flight, the Airbus A320 began a controlled descent over the French Alps. Moments later, it slammed into a remote mountainside near Prades-Haute-Bléone, killing all 150 people on board. The horror deepened when investigators revealed the cause wasn't mechanical failure. It was deliberate. The cockpit voice recorder exposed the chilling truth. Co-pilot Andreas Lubitz had locked the captain out of the cockpit and intentionally guided the plane into the mountains. Lubitz had a documented history of severe depression and suicidal ideation, details known to his doctors but hidden from his employer. Passengers spent the last 8 minutes of the flight in helpless terror as the aircraft plunged. The tragedy rocked Europe and sent shockwaves through the aviation world. In response, airlines around the globe rushed to implement new cockpit protocols, mandating at least 2 crew members remain in the cockpit at all times. UTA Flight 772. On September 19, 1989, UTA Flight 772 departed from Brazzaville, Congo, bound for Paris, France. Just 46 minutes after takeoff, while cruising over the remote expanse of the Sahara Desert in Niger, the McDonnell Douglas DC-10 vanished from radar. Moments later, a mid-air explosion tore the aircraft apart. All 170 people on board, passengers and crew from 17 nations, were killed instantly. French investigators later discovered traces of plastic explosives in the wreckage scattered across the desert floor. The cause was a suitcase bomb placed in the aircraft's forward cargo hold. After a grueling investigation, 6 Libyan agents were tried and convicted in absentia by a French court in 1999. The attack was directly linked to Muammar Gaddafi's intelligence network, marking yet another act of state-sponsored terrorism under his regime, just 1 year after the infamous Lockerbie bombing. The aftermath of UTA Flight 772 stretched far beyond the scorched sand where it fell. In 2004, Libya agreed to pay compensation to the victims' families, but the gesture was seen as political damage control more than justice. The tragedy further isolated Libya internationally and intensified scrutiny of Gaddafi's rule. Today, in the desert where the wreckage once lay, victims' families have erected a haunting memorial, built from recovered debris and stone, an enduring symbol of a brutal act and the lives erased by it. If you enjoyed this, I'm going to be posting a lot more interesting videos here. I'd greatly appreciate it if you could like and subscribe. Thank you very much.